What family secret did you learn that totally shocked you? Not my family. But I thought I'd contribute. Friend turns 15. And she's told she's adopted. Turns out that both her parents died in a car crash when she was just a baby. And her uncle adopted her and raised her. Told her that both parents were dead. A year later, a man messages her on Facebook saying that he's her half-brother. Turns out the dad lived through the car crash and later remarried. Her adopted parents were lying to her as they knew all along. The dad just didn't want to keep her. That's the secret, so to speak. However, the story continues. As her biological father wanted to meet her, she flies out to meet him. Stays with him. Meet his wife and her half-siblings. Struggles with the idea of reconnecting with him. Because she both loathes and loves him. Loathes him for not wanting her and getting a new family. Loves him for wanting to make a difference in her life and reconnect. She takes the plunge anyway. 6 months later he dies from lung cancer. Life's cruel joke on her. My favorite uncle cheated on my auntie. Ended up knocking the woman up. She had the child and my uncle was forced to tell my aunt. Aunt divorced my uncle. He became an alcoholic and I had absolutely no idea. I thought all the times we were going for car rides as a kid. He purposely drove crazy because it was entertaining for me and my cousins, but it turned out he was just plastered. That my mom is actually my grandma. My dad is my step-grandpa. And my sister, who is 13 years older than me, is my mom. And my biological dad was 21 when he got her pregnant. Edit: a lot of y'all are getting more upset about this than I did. I didn't find out until recently. In my 30s. So at this age pretty much nothing shocks you. But it would have shocked me in my teens. When my mother was super religious. Warning us against premarital sex. In my early 20s. She tried to stop my girlfriend and I from living together when we moved to a city where we knew no one. Obviously. We lived together. But we had to hide it from her when she came to visit, when some unmarried friends of mine had a baby unexpectedly. And the child was born with a physical handicap. She even insinuated to me that it was punishment from God for having a baby out of wedlock. So guess what? A few months ago, my aunt mentioned in passing that the reason my parents got married after only knowing each other 4 months was because my mother was pregnant. She ended up miscarrying. Which is why we'd never figured it out before. That my aunt wasn't born looking like that. When she was younger, some kids in the neighborhood ganged up on her and attacked her with a 2x4. I never knew, and once I found out I just felt so sorry for her. I was never told what happened to the attackers. My father had an affair with his brother's wife, so my cousin is also my brother. My cousin doesn't know though. Grandma let this slip whilst wasted. One is mine. One is my friend's. Mine, uncle killed a man in the old country. Gang fight. Picked up one of those big cigarette garbage things and hit another dude in the head. He did time in jail and was disowned by his family. My mom is the only person to visit him. My friend. He was told his parents died. Turns out his dad is his uncle and the woman who raised him, his aunt, is actually his mom. Edit: old country is Taiwan. Edit 2. It's a smoking can. Thanks. My great grandpa died on top of my aunt while raping her when she was 13. Edit: it was my great aunt. So her dad died while raping her of a heart attack. My grandmother pretended she didn't have a sister for 50 years. Recently reconnected. Great lady. My great grandfather was a clan member. And he was married 7 times. My dad was a huge pothead and barely graduated HS. Didn't do college. He is now a fire chief for one of the best fire departments in the country. WTF dad. Edit: you guys. I don't care that people smoke pot and don't go to college. It's just uncommon for someone of his rank to not be college educated, since it's a pretty big requirement. My great grandfather was an abusive piece of it and ended up murdering 3 of my grandaunts and wounded another. He then ended up killing himself after a standoff with the police. My great grandpa murdered one of his own children. The family was a bunch of poor backwards hicks and having trouble feeding their kids. My great-grandma was pregnant and didn't learn until delivery that she was pregnant with twins. Great-grandpa's solution was to bash one of the babies' heads against the wash basin. My grandpa wrote a letter to my mom on his deathbed, and this was one of the things he wrote about in the letter. When my mom told me, my blood turned to ice water. The sheer evilness completely shocked me. Edit. There's been a few comments showing sympathy for my great-grandpa or even defending his actions. Duck off. This isn't a college ball session where we discuss humanism and philosophize about morality. This is something that actually happened. Crushing an infant's skull because you're afraid you can't feed him is evil, plain and simple. My great-grandfather may have murdered my great-grandmother because he believed that my grandfather was the product of an affair. I don't know whether the affair was true, but I know that on his deathbed he still believed it. His last words to my grandfather were, "I never liked you. Yeah, no? Because you weren't mine." Great-grandpa was not murdered. He actually committed suicide. Maybe an inverse sort of deal. But my family were apparently millionaires in the late 1800s. I guess they had always been very wealthy. But between that wealth getting split up every generation and my family living on the run for many generations, all that money was gone by the time I came around. Only thing left was a chunk of property in Mexico that is completely worthless aside from a small bit of money from it cause there's a highway going through it. This totally shocked me because in my lifetime my family has been quite poor. Full on redneck on top of that. And lots of issues with addiction. My aunt with a very holier than thou attitude has been having a 40+ year affair with a childhood sweetheart. This is a person that was always quick to criticize other people's family issues and tried so hard to present her and her family as perfect. Her husband is an asshole to our family and she lets him completely get away with it. I guess we know why now. My great-grandfather was a quiet, kind man and treasurer for his chapter of the Elks Lodge in Texas. He was attacked on his way home from an Elks Lodge meeting. He suffered amnesia and regained consciousness as a sailor on his way to Haiti. After landing, he lived in the country for a few months before getting into a bar brawl with a police officer and getting knocked out. He regained consciousness in jail. With a newfound memory of who he was. He told this tale to a priest from jail, who believed him and wanted to help. The priest wrote my great-grandmother and the American government and somehow convinced the Haitian government to let him return to America. He returned to my great-grandmother, had 2 children, and was a law-abiding citizen for the rest of his life. This story is so unbelievable that when my mother told it to me 6 months ago I was convinced it was a hoax. She has documents, the letters from the priest and others, and testimonials of his friends that say this behavior was uncharacteristic. I dunno. Crazy man. My grandma inherited several $100,000 from her stepdad. The juicy part is that to this day, no one knows how he got it. No one even knew he had that kind of money until he died. Since I'm from the south, my guess is rum running or something like that, but we don't know and likely never will. Always knew grandma died before I was born. Just never knew it was grandpa who murdered her. Not mine. But in my wife's family her great uncle was killed by his wife and the hired hand. Poison was assumed as he was just found dead in the field. They were farmers. His wife married the red-headed hired hand and 8 months after the death she birthed a red-headed son. Everyone in the family in the neighborhood knew except, I guess, the RCMP. This was around 1935 in rural Alberta. In my early 20s, I figured out that my oldest sister was molested by my dad a couple of years before I was conceived. This was obviously a big issue to deal with for a couple of reasons. For starters, my dad is just a horrible human being. But I also hold my mom accountable because she stayed with him even though she quickly learned that it had happened. Imagine, if you will, the knowledge that, had your mom done the right thing, you surely would not exist. That's what I live with. Not only should my mom have left my dad the second she found out, but she should have had him arrested. I should not exist. But, to me, The real problem is with my sister. She is now in her mid-40s and, at this point, I'm certain she will never be able to form healthy relationships even with her own family members. My siblings and I are certain she has borderline personality disorder, and might even suffer from narcissism. And we consequently are frequently subjected to the abuse she heaps on us. At this point, we don't put up with it. We want her to get help and choose not to enable her, but our mom is also poorly treated by her, and she refuses to cut ties. I found out very recently that my maiden name, and subsequently rest of my family's name, was supposed to be completely different but was changed by deed poll when my grandfather was 11 by his stepfather. So before my father, we aren't actually related to anyone with this surname. It means nothing to our heritage or whatever. I had always known that my grandmother, while president of her sorority in college, threw a girl's application in the sewer because the girl was grossly overweight and socially awkward. Grandma then lied to the rest of the sorority that the wind blew the application into the sewer. Only recently did I learn that the girl whose application she lost was Linda Bird Johnson, the daughter of the President of the United States. That my grandmother didn't get a bad neck back from poor posture. Grandfather beat her for spending his savings while away working out of town. She turned into a cripple over the course of 30 years and committed suicide last February. Grandfather has been heavily depressed witnessing it all unfold. My grandmother as I knew her was a hyper-religious Christian woman that had every bit of conservative 1950s social viewpoints. She was racist, sexist, etc. Found out she was pimped out at 16. Got pregnant by the pimp. She didn't want the kids as her father would kill her as they were mixed race. So the pimp took custody and moved to a different state. She was the door kicker in a motorcycle gang. Her brother killed a guy and is serving life in prison. She was part of the same gang. My uncle being a murderer wasn't a shock as he's been in prison since before I was born and I had visited him when I was young.